In this lesson, we'll learn how to use the scale, shear, and rotate method to create isometric artwork. Alright, so in the previous lesson, we learned how to create an isometric grid and then draw shapes based on that grid. Now, an isometric grid is a really great way to create some basic shapes and get used to the idea of isometric projection. And you can see here I've gone ahead and brought in one of our cubes that we created. Now, as you begin drawing more and more advanced shapes in isometric projection, you're actually going to find it easier to not use an isometric grid. There's actually an easier way to create these shapes. You're going to find that creating these shapes in a flat two-dimensional form and then converting them into isometric projection is going to be a much easier workflow. I want to go ahead and show you how to do that using three functions in Illustrator. We're going to use scale, we're going to use a shear, and we're going to rotate the objects. So let's go ahead and break that down. Talk about scale first. Now I've gone ahead and got three columns here. Let's go ahead and grab this first column of squares. And let's go ahead and talk about which of these three faces that we're going to create first. We need to know because whichever face we choose is actually going to affect the values that we input into each one of these different settings. So let's go ahead and say we're going to attack this left face first here. And we need to talk about scale first. So I'm going to go over here and grab my scale tool. It's underneath your shear tool right here. And actually I'm going to go ahead and snap that entire tool set out and bring that up because now we've got all three of those tools visible here. Now, the first thing we actually need to do is a non-uniform vertical scale adjustment. And this is actually going to be a setting and an adjustment we make to each one of these three sides first, no matter which face that we're doing. So let's go ahead and grab this first square here. Let's go ahead and double click on our scale tool. Now, you can see here that the first option is for a uniform scale adjustment. That's actually going to adjust both the vertical and horizontal scale at the same time, and we don't want to do that. We want to do this in a non-uniform fashion. So I want to go ahead and select non-uniform here, and what you want to do is input this value as your vertical scale adjustment. We're going to input 86.602%. Now, I'm not going to get into the math that's behind where that number comes from, but just know that that's always going to be the vertical non-uniform adjustment you're going to make. So let's go ahead and hit OK now. You can see here that our square has now been pinched and it's just a little bit shorter. So we've made our scale adjustment. Let's go ahead and talk about shearing this shape. Now remember, we're creating this left face of our cube, so we're going to go ahead and double click on the shear tool next. And you're going to see here we're presented with a shear angle option here. Now, we're going to leave the axis alone. We're going to leave this on the horizontal axis. And for the left face, we're actually going to input a minus 30 degree value here. So let's input negative 30 degrees. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And we have one other function left. We need to rotate this shape. So let's come over here to the rotate tool, double click on that. And again, we're going to enter in a negative 30 degree value here. So minus 30 and hit OK. And you can see here, let me just go ahead and swing this over into position. What we're left with now is this left face of our cube. Easy enough, right? So I tell you what, let's go ahead and attack this right face now. Let's go ahead and just grab this this next square here, and let's double click on our scale tool. And again, it's retained our non-uniform settings here. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK on that. Let's go ahead and double click on our shear tool next. And now instead of two negative values for shear and rotate, for this right face, we're actually going to input two positive values. So we need to shear this one by a positive 30 degrees. So let me go ahead and do that here. I'm going to go ahead and double click on our rotate tool now as well and change this value to a positive value. So let's go ahead and input 30 degrees here as well. So in doing that, we can swing this one over using our smart guides and snap it into position right next to that initial face that we just drew. And you can see here we've got 2 out of the 3 faces for our cube. So let me go ahead and just select this last square down here, and let's talk about this top face. Now, I'm going to go ahead and again apply my non-uniform vertical scale adjustment here. First thing right out of the gate. And now we need to go ahead and apply our shear and our rotate functions. So remember, when we created the left face, we used 2 negative values. When we created the right face, we used 2 positive values. So one could only guess at this point we would probably use one negative and one positive value in creating this top face of our object, and that's absolutely correct. So let me just go ahead and grab this shape, go ahead and come into our shear tool, and let's go ahead and try a positive 30 degrees for the shear angle. Let's go ahead and double click on rotate, and let's go ahead and input a negative 30 degrees for our rotate angle. And there we go. You can see that we've created the top face of this cube. Let me just snap that into position here. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's a whole lot of steps. There's a whole lot of manual entries that have to be made in order to build this three-dimensional object in two-dimensional space. And you're absolutely right. That's a lot of steps, but Illustrator actually includes something that's really going to help us out in running these series of steps, because these series of steps are really always the same depending on which face we're creating, and we can actually use an action. So I'm going to come up here to our window drop down, and let's just choose this actions option right here, and you can see here that the actions panel has opened up, and we have two folders here. One is for default actions, and we can actually expand that and see several different actions that Illustrator actually comes packaged with. So we're not going to be concerned with those for right now, and what we're going to look at here is this next folder. I've gone ahead and created a folder here for isometric actions. Now, Illustrator actually refers to these folders as sets, and you can create a new set just by clicking on this little folder right here down at the bottom of this panel. So what we need to do now is actually record an action. So I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and attack this left face first here, and let's just repeat that process and record actions this time. Now, if you've ever used Photoshop, these actions are very similar to the way Photoshop handles actions. So we have down here a record, a stop, and a play button right down here in the bottom left corner of our actions panel. Before I press any of those buttons though, I need to go in here and create a new action. So let me just hit that new action button here, and let's just call this action isometric. Let's just call this isometric left. And you can see from this dialog we have an option to put it in a different set. We also have a function key. You can see we can drop this down and assign this to any of our function keys. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and choose one of those now. This is going to be really helpful for us as we develop a map using these isometric actions. So I'm going to go ahead and assign the function key F5 to this. You can see we have a couple radio boxes here we can check for either holding down Shift or holding down the Control key. And we also have a color option for our action. I'm not going to worry about any of that. I'm just going to go ahead and choose that function key, and I'm going to hit record here. Now, after I've hit record, I want to go through the steps of creating that left face. So let's go ahead and first do our non-uniform vertical scale adjustment. Let's come in and shear this shape. And again, remember, for the left face, we're going to apply two negative values. So we need a negative 30 degrees right here. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And then we're going to rotate this again by a minus 30 degrees. So we'll go ahead and hit OK there. And we're left with our left face of the cube. So at this point, I'm going to come over to my Actions panel. I'm going to hit the Stop button. And there we go. We've created our first action. So I tell you what, let's go ahead and just create a couple more actions here. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag these down here just for a moment. Let's go ahead and create that right face again here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new action, call it isometric. Let's call this one isometric right. And I'm going to go ahead and apply the function key. Let's go ahead and hit F8 for this one. Go ahead and hit record. We're going to apply our non-uniform vertical scale adjustment. We're going to shear the shape again. Remember, this one's two positive values, so we need 30 degrees here. And then rotate of, again, 30 degrees. And you can see we've created the right face. So let's go ahead and stop that action. And you can see here that in my isometric actions folder, now we have two different actions. And there's actually, we can twirl those actions down and see what that action consists of. So we've created two out of the three actions we need. We need one more action, and this one's for the top of our cube. So let's come down here now, grab this last face, and let's go ahead and create a third action here. Let's call this isometric top. And let's go ahead and assign the keyboard function key F6 to this one. Go ahead and record that. And again, non-uniform vertical scale adjustment. We're going to shear this. And remember, this one is a positive value and a negative value for shear and rotate. So we'll go ahead and leave 30 right there, hit OK. Then we'll double click on the rotate tool and we'll put in a minus 30 degrees here. And let's go ahead and stop that action as well. Alright, so we've created all three faces for this second cube here. Let's go ahead and swing those into position. And I've got one more column here where we can actually test these out. So just adjust that position there. Let's go ahead and come in here now. Let's go ahead and run these actions on these new shapes. So we've got all three actions here. All we have to do now is come in, select our left face, click on the left action and hit the play button. Select our right face, click on that action and hit the play button again, and then select our last face, select the action for the top, and we're going to hit play one more time. And you can see how much quicker that is than actually manually inputting all those values into those different dialog boxes. We can actually record these actions, and this is actually going to save us a lot of time as we go through the process of designing an isometric map. Now, so far this process has worked really great creating a cube. Now, I want to come down here to this second artboard, and I've got a series of shapes down here, and I want to show you what happens, particularly with the top action, to a shape that's a little more unique. Let's go ahead and just consider this shape right here. I'm going to go ahead and grab that shape. Let's make a copy of that and bring it up to our first artboard here. We'll get some of these cubes out of the way. We'll make a couple different copies of that. And I tell you what, let's go ahead and change the color of these shapes using our eyedropper tool. Select that with keyboard shortcut I so we can see those. And let's go ahead and run our isometric top action on this shape on the left here and see what happens to this. Now, in running that action, you can see here that it's actually rotated this shape clockwise. Now, you know, that may not actually be the result you were looking for. You may actually want to end up with a reflected version of this shape. So if we grab our reflect tool, maybe you wanted to end up with something like this. I tell you what, in working in isometric projection, what I like to do for my top action is I like to create a second action for the top. Now, let's go ahead and create that action now. I'm going to go ahead and select this other shape here. And I tell you what, let's go ahead and create a new action. And I'm going to go ahead and call this action isometric top, and I'm going to put a CCW here for counterclockwise. And let's assign a function key of F7 to this one. Go ahead and hit record here. And again, we're going to do our non-uniform vertical scale adjustment first. So coming in here to the shear tool. Now remember when we were creating the very first top face, we used a positive 30 on our shear and a negative 30 on our rotate. Let's go ahead and flip those around. Let's use a negative 30 on our shear. Let's go ahead and use a positive 30 on our rotate. And you can see here what we're left with is exactly the opposite end result. So we've actually rotated this shape counterclockwise now in the end result. So we'll just come in here and stop that action now. And there we go. We've created a fourth action. Now we can always come in and rename an action just by double clicking on that. Let's go ahead and put in clockwise, CW on that one. We've got all four isometric actions created that we're going to need in order to create our isometric map. Speaking of isometric maps, in the next lesson we're going to go ahead and get started in creating a map. We're going to get started first by laying out the streets of our map.